Okay. Hi, Michael.
Hi.
Today's questions. I'll read you the first question. To what extent is it important to have discernment in order to identify the movements or tricks that ego carries out in order to deceive us and not allow us to go inside?
Discernment is essential. Discernment here is what in Sanskrit is called vivēka. But the rest of the question needs a little bit of clarification. Ego is not something other than ourselves. We who are trying to investigate ourselves, we who are trying to surrender ourselves, we who are aware of all this are ego. So ego is not, as I say, it's not something other than ourselves that is trying to trick us. As ego, we are tricking ourselves, or we are deluding ourselves, let's say. Why we much of the time we are, instead of turning our attention within, we're turning our attention outwards, thinking of things other than ourselves. The reason for what we need to discern, what we need to recognize, is that the reason for this is our own desires and attachments. Why it seems to be difficult for us to turn within is because of our we have so much desire to be aware of other things, to experience other things, and we have so much attachment to other things that our mind is constantly going outwards. As Bhagavan says in the 14th paragraph of Nana, who am I? This is because of vivēka. That means lack of discernment, lack of proper judgment. We wrongly believe, but we can obtain happiness from things other than ourselves. Whereas according to Bhagavan, there's no happiness in anything other than ourselves. Happiness is our real nature, and there's no happiness in anything other than our real nature. So in order to experience happiness, we need to turn within. But we have for a long time been deluding ourselves, believing that we can obtain happiness from things outside. Even though we have studied Bhagavan's teachings and we understand at a conceptual level that happiness lies only within, we are not yet sufficiently fully convinced, because if we were truly convinced that happiness lies only within, our mind would go only within. It wouldn't be going outwards. The fact that our mind is going outwards means we still haven't, our understanding that happiness lies only within is still a weak and superficial understanding. It's not firmly rooted and it's not deep enough. So we do need discernment to recognize this and to recognize why we are going outwards and to recognize how to turn our mind back within. How do we gain such discernment is the most important question, relevant question to this. We can, to a certain extent, gain discernment by studying and thinking deeply about Bhagavan's teachings and convincing ourselves at an intellectual level, at a conceptual level, but happiness lies only within, etc., etc. Whatever Bhagavan has taught us, if we read it and think deeply about it, we can understand the reason, the logical reasoning behind it, and we can convince ourselves, at least at that surface level of the mind. But that surface conviction, though it's necessary, it's not going to take us very far. We need a deep inner clarity of understanding. That deep inner clarity will come only by persistent practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So in order to investigate and surrender ourselves, we need discernment. And in order to get discernment, we need to investigate and surrender ourselves. So it may seem like a catch-22 situation, but actually it is not, because only when we have already have a certain degree of discernment, will we even be interested in practicing self-investigation and self-surrender? We may not be able to go very deep in the practice at first, but the very fact that we've got an interest in it shows there's at least a little discernment. So if we use that discernment by trying our best as much as possible to turn our attention within, and thereby to surrender ourselves, that will give, the more we turn our attention within, the more we subside, the more we surrender ourselves, the more the natural inner clarity will shine forth. So by our attempts to practice self-investigation and self-surrender, however feeble and faltering our attempts may be, every step on this path is one step closer to the goal. So Bhagavan used to say, no effort made on this path will ever go in vain. So though our efforts may seem to us to be very feeble and very insignificant and insufficient, it doesn't matter. All we need to do is, as much as we can, we need to be trying to turn our attention within. The more we turn our attention within, the more the clarity, the clarity which is ever shining within our heart, the clarity of pure awareness, will be shining forth and illumining our mind. And it's in the illumined mind that the discernment is actually a product of that inner clarity, which we gain by the practice of self-investigation and self-surrender. So the more we attempt to practice self-investigation and self-surrender, the more discernment we will gain. And the more discernment we have, the more we will be, and the more inclined we will be to turn our attention within, to investigate and surrender ourselves.
But to ask you, Michael, sorry, when you say, for example, or Bhagavan, when he used to say by constant practice or effort or in trying to turn our attention within, I mean, how much that would be? Because if we look at the facts, for example, of an average aspirant, for example, an average practitioner, maybe, I don't know how much, but maybe we can turn attention within maybe 5% in one day, you know, or like, I mean, 5% of the day, you know, like 10 times or 15 or 5 or 1 or 100. So when he said constant practice, I mean, ideally is as much as we can, of course. But how do you think, how much is needed to break through, to gain that? This, I mean, it's, I think we're talking about some important figure here.
Bhagavan does say we should practice this constantly, but Bhagavan knows that in practice most of us are not able to practice it constantly. So we have to understand when he says constantly as possible, as constantly as we are able to do. How constantly must that be? Even a little, as Bhagavan said, even one step on this path is a step in the right direction, a step closer to our goal. So even if it's just a fraction of a percentage of the day we spend attending to ourselves, to that extent we are making progress. Of course, the more we attend to ourselves, the faster our progress will be. But no amount of effort on this path can be a waste. Even the smallest effort on this path is taking us that little bit closer to our goal. So we should understand when Bhagavan says constantly, he means as constantly as we can, as constantly as we are willing to do. Turning our attention within is not difficult. What makes it seem difficult is our unwillingness to do so. So slowly, we have to wean our mind off this unwillingness. Slowly, we have to cultivate the willingness, which we can do only by slowly, gently, gradually practicing turning our attention within.
And there is also a proportion, Michael, in the sense that, for example, if we're turning our attention within, like, I don't know, 90% of the day, let's say, you know, it's,
Yes.
I mean, that would mean that our desires and attachments are much less than
Yes,
somebody
yes.
who is,
Yes.
I don't know, like
To-
5% of the day turning their attention within,
Yes.
of course.
To the extent that we are able to turn our attention within, to that extent our desires and attachments have been reduced. Because the desires and attachments are, the discernment, the vivēka, is actually our natural state. There's naturally an inner clarity. What obscures the inner clarity in our heart is our desires and attachments. So the more we are able to turn within, the weaker our desires and attachments become. And the weaker our desires and attachments become, the more we will be able to turn within. So if we're able to turn our attention within 5% of the day this year, and next year it progresses to 10%, that means we have made progress. But of course, these numbers, we are just hypothetical. We can't measure how much we are attending to ourselves. Our aim should be to attend to ourselves more and more and more, as much as possible. The actual the percentage, we don't have to be concerned about trying to measure how much we're turning within. As much as possible, that's all that is required.
That was what I was about to tell you, that can easily lead into, you know, the kind of thoughts that, yes, I'm not doing enough, this is too little,
yeah.
It's just self-loathing for that.
Instead of wasting our time thinking of those thoughts, we could be using that time more usefully attending to ourselves. So let's not have any regrets about, oh, I'm not doing it enough. Let's just try and do it as much as we can.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good message, because usually it's when we talked about suffering, that not making enough progress can be a reason for suffering. Yeah, it's a good message to.
How much progress we are making? How much progress we are making? Let us leave that worry to Bhagavan. Bhagavan said he will carry all the burdens. All he's asked us to do is to try as much as possible to attend to ourselves. Let's do that, and let's not think about anything else.
One thing that I think the question, what this question want to pursue, to resolve, is that since the ego is itself the one who is searching to eradicate itself,
yes,
but it's also the one who is constantly reasserting itself. Exactly, and deluding us into thinking that we are this body mind time and again. So that's the paradox, so to speak. Sometimes it might be deluding us in ways that we cannot even understand, and sometimes we're pursuing actually the eradication.
But even talking about the ego and referring to it as it is in a way misleading. Ego means I. It's I who want to investigate myself. It's I who, though I want to investigate myself, I also want to think about other things. So the battle, it's all a battle in our own heart, within our own will. Do we want to attend to ourselves, or do we want to attend to other things?
Is that a way of deluding ourselves, like putting the ego as a third person that we don't want to identify with?
Exactly. We are just confusing ourselves by thinking of ego as it, as a third person.
We should take responsibility. I'm the one who is desiring. I'm the one who is.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Michael. Thank you very much.
The term ego is used by Bhagavan to distinguish what we now seem to be from what we actually are. So in certain contexts, it's useful to distinguish ego from our real nature. But as far as practice is concerned, it's all done only by ego. So it's, and ego means what we now experience ourselves to be. So we have, in waking and dream, we experience ourselves as ego. So it is that I which rises in waking and dream. That is ego. That is what is to do the practice, and that is what is seeking to know its real nature. When it knows its real nature, it will cease to be ego and be as we actually are. See, even I'm referring to it as it. We can't get away from it, but we have to.
It's hard. It's hard.
We have to remember, ego means I.
Yeah, that's we have to keep that into account. Yes, not to forget that.
Ego is actually a Latin word, but means I. In Tamil, Bhagavan used there were two words Bhagavan used in Tamil, both of which are from Sanskrit origin. The one term he used most commonly to refer to ego is ahande, which is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit term ahanta. Ahanta means I-ness. And the other term he used is ahankara, which means the I maker. But in both cases, it's I. Or he also used another term often in Tamil, nanenam ninevu, the thought I. But in all cases, it's I. Ego means only I. So it's not any third person, as you say. It is just I.
Exactly.
But it is not I as I actually am, but I as I seem to be when I rise and identify myself with a body and mind.
Do you think there is any good in saying, I mean, not saying ego as a third person, but saying I ego, or I don't know, or...
Yeah, well,
I mean, it's just a verbal thing.
Language has its limitations. We just have to understand it correctly. We should be wary about talking about ego as if it were a third person. It is ourself who have now risen as ego. So it is ourself who now have to decide whether we want to turn within or whether we want to go outwards towards other things. If we use our discernment, our vivēka, correctly, we will turn within. If we fail to use it correctly, we will run outwards after all the seemingly interesting things of the world, the things that but these seemingly interesting things of the world are not actually interesting. It's we who make them seem interesting because of the value we give to them.